I don't think there's anything more generic than zombies in entertainment. It's horror as old as the genre itself, much like the vampire, the slasher, and the ghoul. But zombies have been seen in gaming far more than others in its field. Stubbs, Resident Evil, Left 4 Dead, Back 4 Blood, just to name a few. Now, just because these games are part of an oversaturated subgenre, doesn't mean that they're inferior to any competitors or lesser than a game in any other genre. But it's important to establish just how many zombie games are out there. You wouldn't be wrong to think that developers have probably done everything. I mean, gameplay-wise, you're put in a fight or flight scenario, and almost every game saw you fighting and doing so with engaging mechanics. Those that saw you opting for flight due to lack of resources or ways to defeat the undead foes saw you hightailing it in the other direction with minimal depth, just running and maybe jumping a few places. It's surprising then that it wasn't until 2015 that Techland developed Dying Light, a game that features fight or flight like many of its predecessors, but puts extra focus on the latter, leading to a game that garnered mainstream success and a cult following years later. One of this game's biggest inspirations has a cult following of its own, and it's a series I've covered on my channel before. Mirror's Edge was praised for being a game unlike any other, and that praise is deserved, as is the praise given to Dead Island for being an exceptional open-world zombie game. You'll notice that Dying Light is heavily derivative of both of these games, but don't let that say anything about how this game plays. While on the surface, Dying Light is the DNA splice of Mirror's Edge and Dead Island, once you get deep into the game and its mechanics, you'll see that rather than merely emulating its inspirations remarkably well, Techland built onto these mechanics, making this game unique and well worth playing even if you've played its inspirations. It's also unsurprising that this game plays like Dead Island, as Techland's core development team had developed it. Techland had been a known team prior to Dead Island for working on some of the Call of Juarez games, which offer a staggering contrast to what they develop now. Dead Island, on the other hand, was my, and I imagine a lot of your first experiences with Techland and their games. And while the game performed well enough, it had some noticeable flaws in its presentation, but most praised its atmosphere, leading to a sequel in Dead Island Riptide and the unreleased Dead Island 2. Why was it unreleased as of this video and still isn't? Well, Techland split off from its publisher Deep Silver due to creative differences and instead secured a publishing deal under Warner Brothers, who gave the team full creative control. What did they want to do with this control? Liberate us, empower us, and terrify us. Well, actually what they did was create the fictional Middle Eastern city of Harran, where a plague has taken the city by storm, turning its infected into different iterations of walkers, runners, beasts, and biters. We play as one Kyle Crane, an agent of the global relief effort tasked with infiltrating the city, finding an important file relating to the virus, and bringing it back home. That's simple enough, but as we continue to try and please everyone doing quest after quest, our loyalties become conflicted and we face our greatest foe yet: a decision. But we should quarantine that part of the game for the time being, as let's be honest with ourselves, nobody remembers the story. And while it may not have been the worst, it holds nothing to the gameplay, which despite taking place half the time in the tunnel vision of your flashlight, outshines the plot both in motion and in memory. But you and I aren't the only ones who felt this way, as critics across the board praised Dying Light's gameplay for being fresh despite coming from a decaying genre, and loathed its plot for being predictable and ultimately falling into a lot of the cliches it attempted to critique. Over the years since its initial release, the game has received a handful of DLC add-ons that have been met with both praise and pillory. But such constant support and inclusion of a very solid endgame allows this game to still be played to this day. As I write this, there were plenty of players for me to invade and plenty of players to do the same to me. So why then is it important to take a look back at this game all these years later? The sequel is already out, and most of you watching this are either doing so while grinding side quests or trying to relive the memories of the first game while you save up for the sequel. But I think the importance of looking back on a product like this is that it can give fans the opportunity to examine aspects of a game from an unbiased perspective, and it often gives us a greater appreciation for the game, and in some cases, a greater appreciation for its sequels. So why not? Let's time travel back to the good old days and look at what many would call the best zombie game we've seen in years, and look at every part of it, both the good and the bad, the bright and the sinister. But spoilers ahead, so do beware. I know I don't usually cover horror games on this channel, so while I cannot guarantee that this video won't have spooky imagery or tones, I can confirm that there will be no jump scares with loud noises and whatnot, and if I absolutely need to show a cutscene with a jump scare, I will have a disclaimer on screen that looks like this. I'm not about scaring people at 3 AM or whenever they watch this, and I wouldn't do that to you. What I will do to you is plug my Patreon. These videos take a great amount of time and effort on my part, so any donations are greatly appreciated. Plus, you get access to some of these awesome benefits, and because of how often I'll be saying the words pandemic, outbreak, and infection, there's a good chance that this video will be demonetized. Alternatively, if you want to buy this game and support me at the same time, you can click my GOG affiliate link in the description and get an exclusive deal on Dying Light. But let's get back on track here and dive into Harran's infected deep end. Welcome to Dying Light, fellas, and good luck. The eyes of the world have been glued to the city of Harran for the past 2 months, following the outbreak of a previously unknown pathogen. It is not clear yet what has caused this gruesome affliction. The local government's Ministry of Defense erected a quarantine rule shortly after the outbreak, but the global relief effort's steady stream of supply drops has sustained what few survivors remain in the city. The Ministry of Defense thinks more radical action should be taken to stem the tide of this virus, but the question is, are there still non-infected survivors in the city as the GRE maintains? And if so, will the ministry still go through with their stated plan to annihilate the city in an attempt to wipe out the virus once and for all? Whether by way of the virus or the ministry's supposed plan, there's one thing that is certain. Harran's days are numbered. When Hassan and Kadir Suleiman were to be evacuated, Hassan succumbed to the city's sickness, leading Kadir to blame the GRE and seal a highly sensitive document, using it to bargain with the GRE. This file has the details for a cure to the virus, and Kadir plans to release the file publicly if anything happens to him. Find Suleiman and get the cure. That is the goal of Cal Crane, as he parachutes into the bandit and zombie-ridden city of Harran. Harran was founded by Carthaginian merchants, who were attracted to the location thanks to the fresh water coming from the Emerald Pond. As the region grew, so did its stronghold, now a museum, and the city's walls, which were rebuilt along with the rest of Harran due to an 11th century drought and famine that caused riots and mass destruction. Once the rebellion had quelled, the Turkish stepped in to continue Harran on the path of development and to prevent any uprisings, but they could not prevent the fires that torched half of the city in the 19th century. Not that the Ottoman Empire cared, as they didn't even rebuild it. By the end of the First World War, thanks to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, Harran became a self-governed city-state. All of this is explained in audio logs and journal entries, and goes to show how dedicated Techland was to crafting a world that has a reason for existing, and a reason for existing in its current state. Weeks before the outbreak, Harran had become more notable thanks to its hosting of the Harran Global Athletic Games. This is why our present Harran is a melting pot, with people of many different backgrounds traveling in to compete and spectate in the event. In the weeks leading up to the games, the virus began, and due to Harran being on the cusp of such economic prosperity, it was kept a secret. Eventually, during one of the parkour events at the Harran Stadium, a horde of infected entered, likely drawn in by the sounds of cheering. That's when international widespread coverage began. As the government scrambled to regain control and order, certain hotspots began developing. Supermarkets, underground parking lots, hotels, and restaurants. Those within these spaces did their best to section off the infected. Some stayed within these zones on their own fruition, believing that the best way to beat the plague was to wait it out. Others weren't given the choice. The government took it upon themselves to lock down hotspots without offering any notice, and anyone left alive was stuck, waiting for their release. Some chose to go out their own way, others played their favorite songs as they patiently awaited the Reaper, and others still roam the halls to this day. The restaurant contains just as many barricaded doors as the hotels, and the evidence of how the people inside dealt with their trauma and their situations is written on the walls, at times in their own blood. A lovely piano arrangement gives the hotel a feeling of relaxing tranquility, but within this context, the music has a haunting undertone, as the environment and even the song itself begins to distort, like some kind of nightmare. These were people, with their own stories to tell. All of this, and yet by the time we arrive, traversing Harran can feel like coasting above a sea of bodies. Harran is split into 3 different districts, separated by a mountain and a bridge. The slums are, as the name implies, many rundown buildings with roofs that are just one fall away from collapsing, and graffiti covering nearly every surface. Poverty and crime are everyday concerns, and while for some this is a mild inconvenience, here it's just Monday. Doors are often barred from the other side, and windows have bars to prevent burglaries. As the survivors were short on resources and had little in ways of defending against the demonic horde, they were forced to repair their homes with scrap materials. Before the outbreak, there had been plans to properly redevelop the slums, but the only finished building was the tower, and it now stands as a lonely watchtower offering a beautiful view that, being so high up, allows us to forget, but for a moment, the horrors down below. Fortunately, you could break a sizable fall by landing on the piles of trash that mark every block, or the stranded cars, assuming they aren't still on fire. These, along with the city's previously alive inhabitants, crowd the roads and pathways between the homes and low-end commercial buildings. You won't see any fancy clothing boutiques or high-end retailers here, just what is needed to sustain life, if anything at all. Despite the homes here being clearly packed, you won't find too many zombies or abandoned cars here, and that's not a product of hardware, but because of the bridge. You know the one. The zombies aren't here because they're here instead. Their one chance of escaping from hell. And what's on the other side? as close to salvation as we'll get. Medkits, high-tier weapons, and crafting materials. It's too bad then that the bridge was cut off, meaning nobody can make it to the other side. These borders are present all around Harran. Skyscraping barriers multiple feet thick and drops into fatal ocean dives reinforce that feeling that while free running around the city may instill a liberating freedom, you are still in quarantine. And what freedom you have now will be ripped away from you the moment the clock strikes 11. But let's get back to that bridge, because before the outbreak it served as an avenue to Old Town, the game's other half. The population of Old Town is, much like its economy, overwhelmingly large. With larger walkers, demolishers, and even more bandits, the rooftops become so much more valuable. The slums have a lot of low-rises and huts to make consecutive platforming low stakes and accessible. The slums feature zombies and humans as immediate threats, but by the time you arrive at Old Town, you'll have the experience to deal with an entirely new enemy: height. The average building here is tall enough to make any mistake near, if not fatal. While walking a tightrope across a gap is achievable when taking your time, when you are on someone, or rather, something else's time, you're forced to take risk after risk to properly traverse this cityscape. Fortunately, there is a familiarity here, as this district's central hub is also 2 large towers, and that, while not the same in size and scope, feels like a slice of home. Within Old Town, you'll encounter far more boss fights, and something that Dying Light executes to prove its atmospheric excellence is making the once tense and dangerous walkers become a source of comfort. Hearing the groans and stumbles of zombies nearby, it's now normal. It's part of the plan, and when you, on the rare occasion, hear silence, it's far more unsettling than the sound of the undead slowly but surely approaching. You'll notice that while the crawlers are a threat here, theft and poverty most certainly was not. Windows lack any of the bars from the slums, and a lot of them are just left open, by either a very comfortable citizen or one using it as their last chance of escape. The sturdier buildings and neoclassical architecture allow for greater depth, as different protrusions and pillars mesh well with our movement abilities. Being the wealthier and well-off half of Harran is true both before and after the catastrophe, as while it has to deal with the more dangerous undead hordes, it has greater resources to work towards a cure, rather than having the goal of the slums, which was just survival. They have the luxury of technology and education, as the university continues to serve its role as an intellectual hub for the still living. That doesn't mean every person here is working towards a cure or studying the virus. In fact, most, despite said luxuries, are still just finding ways to survive. With these added advantages though, they have the opportunities to cope and survive in different ways. Some have convinced those around them that the nightmare is the product of an evil wizard's dark magic, and others are spending their last days so inebriated or high that they can't help but for a moment forget. I've only scratched the surface of the stories that this restless city has to tell, but for now we can talk about at least one area of the map where your biggest concern isn't the undead, and that is the countryside. Out here, parkour takes a bit of a backseat, and thanks to the cult's special potion, zombies become quite friendly. The citizens' biggest threat is rather the bandits looking to pillage what is left of the farmland. With little for buildings to climb on and plenty of ground to cover, you're introduced to a new form of traversal, but we may be getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's circle back to the greater Harran and look at something interesting about the day and night cycle. Each day is roughly 64 minutes, meaning you'll have a solid hour to rummage through Harran and prep for the coming night. Why? Well, let's just say that the daytime gameplay and atmosphere can feel like a survival action flick, but at night, it takes a nosedive into survival horror. The zombies that stumble towards you during the day now move with greater speed. Virals can now climb, as can the volatiles. You won't have to worry about them though, so long as you stay hidden. Much like your vision in the nighttime, as your flashlight serves as your only source of tunnel vision, virals and volatiles have a cone of vision that must be avoided. Nothing, and I mean nothing, is more tense than trying to sneak around an enemy that can kill you in only 2 hits. Sometimes your goal might be in a corner, and the only way to get out of there is to pray that these demonic creatures look the other way, and if they don't, run. These souped up zombies, while not only doing a scary amount of damage, can also take away your greatest ally, elevation. Giving an enemy the ability to traverse the Y-axis is everything this game needs to instill the fear of God in us, as we now have no easy means of escaping, and the best tool we have now is our own skills. And under pressure, you're bound to falter. With your limited vision, you become even more limited and at the mercy of your pursuers. By day, you're a predator, and by night, you're prey. Just as by day, the city is Jekyll, and by night, Hyde. From playground to panic, you are at the mercy of Harran. Many of you likely remember the feeling of running from the virals in the dead of the night, and you may be confused to hear that the nighttime only lasts 7 minutes, just under a tenth of the daytime. It doesn't feel that way because the daytime is so casual, but during the nighttime every second matters, and when your every second counts, you're less likely to lose track of time the same way you would endlessly picking locks in the day. The only place you can find solace is within the many safe houses scattered around Harran. These safe houses are your chance to catch your breath, restock on supplies, and in some cases, skip the night entirely. But let's just focus on the atmosphere, because I think it's something that Dying Light excels at. Taking a player and swiftly ripping them from their sense of security with an alarm informing you of your limited time is a feeling of true horror that we don't see as much as I'd like to these days. Dying Light does not rely on jump scares or even scary imagery to terrify its players, but instead uses player agency and their progression against them. Dying costs some experience, and this makes the scary part about the nighttime not what the monsters are, but what they'll do to you. This is especially the case when in Old Town, as the inclusion of Fatal Falls means that not only are the monsters behind you drooling at the sight of your death, but one misstep also spells game over, leading to moments where I didn't realize how tense my entire body was until the sun came up and I let out a heavy exhale. Even outside of inducing fear, the game knows exactly how to make you feel like a fish out of water. When you first arrive at the tower, you'll notice that everyone looks at you funny and has some not so quiet conversations about you. It makes the player feel exactly how Crane does, a stranger, and it helped me connect with the character near immediately. I should also mention that technically, Dying Light looks good. Some of the faces look like they've been put through a fucking hydraulic press, but most characters and environments look good and the game performs fine enough. But running this game on PC is a major pain in the neck, and in my case the game ran horribly unless I completed a laundry list of troubleshooting. Regardless, from what I know, these problems are rare, and the game's fidelity, while not going to blow you away, is sufficient for those craving the desired atmosphere. My favorite part about Dying Light's atmosphere as a whole is that the jump scares are relatively scarce, and they instead make use of the anticipation of those jump scares to spook its players. When looting around, you'll often open these closets, and they contain plenty of materials, but there is one time in the game where you open a closet and there's a zombie in there. This one time was all it took for me to consistently tense up and prepare myself for a zombie to be inside one of these things. The game doesn't bother indulging in the scares too much, and instead enjoys just messing with you. While the atmosphere is certainly one of the best parts of this game, it falls apart without consistent gameplay. Making an incorrect jump while in the heat of fear leads to death and a feeling of defeated relief. Sure, you died, but at least the chase is over and you get a chance to reset and catch your breath. Making a correct jump that due to some kind of jank led to death would invoke anger and frustration, as if the game is cheating. Fortunately, from a control and strictly speaking from the perspective of the player, Dying Light plays by the rules. The gameplay of Dying Light is split into fighting or fleeing, and knowing when to engage in either will be key to your growth and your survival. We can look at the combat first for no other reason than to get it out of the way. Now don't take that as me implying the combat is bad, but rather it's familiar. Anyone who's played Dead Island and even first-person RPGs like Skyrim will be right at home. You have one-handed and two-handed weapons and even the arrival of bows and eventually guns. The swords and daggers do feel good, and they feel like they have a solid range to them. There are plenty of different designs and animations which keep the combat visually interesting and consistently evolving, albeit in small increments. The bow and gunplay feels fine. It serves its purpose well enough, and thankfully they are all accurate enough to make hitting headshots with proper aim reliable and the most efficient way to deal with enemies. It's important to have the gunplay feel reliable here because your ammo is so limited. Every human enemy will go down after one headshot, with some larger zombified enemies taking a few more. Shooting your foes in the body will quickly run through your ammo, so shooting enemies in the head is the best way to maximize damage while minimizing ammo consumption. Also, the sound is downright addicting. Using a bow always felt unreliable because of its sharp drop-off, but it was far quieter than the guns. And guns beat it out in every other way, including stealth, assuming you can craft a weapon with a suppressor. If guns blazing is your approach, or if you just don't feel like playing the game, then feel free to pick up a rare double barrel, which borderline erases an enemy's code from the game. It may seem like these guns are overpowered, and they truly are, but before we sink our teeth into the progression, let's look at what this game is like without guns. Melee feels far better here than it does in its contemporaries, though I understand that that may be an unpopular opinion. The different kinds of weapons offer different advantages. Short knives may be faster and offer greater damage, but they require you to get close to your targets, while an axe allows you to damage them from afar, though with slower speed. Your medium-sized weapons strike a great middle ground that makes them best for your everyday zombie-slaying situations. Striking zombies in different areas deals varying amounts of damage, but the only one you need to worry about is the head, as it's where you'll be the most effective. Also, there are few things as satisfying as seeing a game slow down as a walker's head flies off its shoulders thanks to a clean katana chop. This isn't your only tool though, as through the acquisition of upgrades you can eventually make use of silent takedowns and camouflage, allowing you to blend in with zombies and take both them and bandits down silently. If you prefer the louder approach, then you can eventually make use of heavy attacks, which can greatly stun the receiver, and further upgrades will let you instantly take down any enemies that are stunned or on the ground, leading to rather explosive results. The air even has its share of abilities like the drop attack, which can help you break a fall by landing on a zombie, plunging a blade into its chest or head. You can even use the opposite of this, the vault, which sees you using a zombie as a stepping stool, getting great height and momentum. On the more defensive side, you can grapple an enemy and toss them in the opposite direction, allowing you to create more space upon them, closing the gap if a strafe doesn't quite do the trick. If a walker gets a hold of you, then the various upgrades can allow you to reverse the tides on them. Okay, let's be real here. The slide kicking and ramming zombies is fun, but you guys know what the real bread and butter is here. The dropkick is possibly Dying Light's most famous upgrade that has prompted millions of giggles and lightspeed ragdolls across the world. There's something just so satisfying about running at an enemy full speed and bringing all of your momentum to their face, and it's a disservice to call this an ability or an attack. This is bullying, and it feels glorious. As far as offensive approaches go, Dying Light gives you plenty of room to make use of both combat and agility-based approaches here, and I always feel like I had the tool for the job. This sentiment extends to the movement here, of which a lot of your combat abilities intersect. Things like the grapple are upgrades that are acquired in the agility tree, but I just lumped it in with the combat because it was more efficient. This is a good thing because it forces you to interact with both sides of Dying Light, and it prevents the player from having a lopsided character. Certain upgrades like the aforementioned vaults are great for turning what would otherwise be a threat to you into a tool, aiding you in your many escapes. Even other upgrades, while impacting your combat more than your flight away from a battle, all follow a theme of turning the tides of battle in your favor. The actual movement here is, again, familiar for anyone who has played Mirror's Edge, and that's okay. The traversal within your environment is based around what the developers referred to as hooks, which just act as anything that the player character can climb. A system was specifically developed for this game where, through an algorithm, hooks were automatically placed around the map, and it would determine what exactly the player was climbing and what animation to pair with it, rather than the developers hand placing them. This system, called natural movement, saved developers a considerable amount of time, and it means that for the player, I did not once encounter something that I couldn't climb that I felt like I should. Bartosz Kulon is who you can thank for this system. Kulon, in an interview with GDC, explained some of the struggles with the parkour and explaining how integral it is to make a first-person jump feel just right. One of the ways they made the jumping feel so good is by taking into account the different perceptions of when people jump from a platform to a hook. Wily frames, which is giving the player the ability to jump even if they are slightly off of a platform, helps those that jump too late. Kulon also explains that giving the players as much control as possible was a top priority, and that this was achieved in even the simplest of ways. When performing an animation to pull yourself up, initially your camera was fixed, but Bartosz explains that giving the player a simple freedom of moving the camera made them feel far more in control. Player control is exactly why the jump button for this game on gamepad is R1 instead of X, because that way players can move the camera while they are climbing, which couldn't be possible when using the X button, unless you were playing with a claw grip or with an extra thumb. Another major mechanic that a lot of you likely noticed once or twice is the way the game pushes and pulls you in slight ways to make movement more fluid and allow greater room for error. You can still miss a jump or hit a wall, but if you're only slightly off, then the game will correct the error for you. Surprisingly, this, in almost every case, did not backfire aside from one time where I was pushed past a safe landing and died because of it. All of this information, by the way, is available from the man himself thanks to a lecture he did, which you can find a link to in the description. It has a lot of really interesting details and insights, and I can't recommend it enough. Why do I bring up these little details? Because it exemplifies how an inch of tweaking can go miles for a movement system, and that is what makes it so good. The control and precision that is given to the player makes pulling off perfect hops and leaps over the ocean of undead feel liberating and rewarding. Anything that you can see within the walls of Harran, barring a few exceptions, can be climbed, and while this game's movement is great for exploration, it's at night that it truly shines. During the day, you'll be using a lot of your melee abilities, slicing away at the masses and pummeling the bandits around town, and the game is quite combat-centric, but at night, open combat is the last thing you'll want to do. Everything from your environment to how you traverse it changes. Rooftops are no longer a means of advantage but a means of survival. When running from a volatile, you'll need to chain together perfect jumps and make use of smart pathing to escape. And because the movement is visceral and reliable, it's fun, and that's exactly what movement should be. There are some movement upgrades that allow you to, for example, roll with the right timing to negate fall damage, and you can wall climb after a jump to make reaching a ledge easier. Once that upgrade is unlocked, you can also use the wall eject skill, which has its very situational uses. It's clear that only your core abilities were factored into the city's design, and that's fine. That doesn't mean you won't get any use out of these new moves, because in the case of the slide, you will. You can use this skill to slide under a nail trap, which will defeat any zombies that touch it, and it'll carry your momentum too. Both skill trees have a line of upgrades that increase damage received and damage taken, as well as skills dedicated to just becoming more efficient in your desired tree. By the end of the game, you won't get tired from swinging, smacking, scrambling, or scaling, and it's where the game's limits, especially within traversal, are removed. Running away from a volatile in the night can become far more tense if you have to slow down for a second and catch your breath, allowing them to gain on you, but this isn't a problem by the end game, and perhaps this is in itself a problem, but let's instead focus on how we get these filled in skill trees. There's also a third skill tree, which is the survivor tree, but I haven't mentioned it much because it contains a lot of upgrades that make a large difference, sure, but not for being integral in their own right, but just meshing extremely well with your power and agility skills. Things like getting better prices, better crafting, and more space to carry things, and so on. You level up the survivor tree by completing quests and surviving the night, amongst other things. You'll lose survivor points if you die though, which adds a layer of fear when in a tight encounter. It seems that you don't lose survivor points during the night, but depending on the circumstances, of which the game doesn't make very clear, you can lose up to 2,000 points. While I was still able to hit max level by the end of the game and have plenty of fun along the way, this made me very reluctant to try new things. Some side activities give you 5,000 survivor points, and to lose over a third of that to a simple mistake felt too punishing. I understand what they were going for here, but some of the upgrades within the survivor tree, while not integral to your enjoyment, can completely change the way you interact with the world. So achieving these upgrades is very important. Fortunately, you won't lose any agility or power points upon death, and you earn these points by just doing things. Swinging a hammer and killing an enemy gives you points, and any jumping and climbing does the same but for agility. I like this system a lot because it really allows you to feel the progression, and it says a lot about a player when you see which skill is higher than the other. As mentioned, you won't be completely over-leveled here, as both the main and side quests give you plenty of platforming and combat encounters, but for someone like myself, I enjoy movement so much more than any combat in the game, so I was always getting more upgrades for movement, and the same would go for combat if I liked that one and naturally used it more. A slight problem that occurs is when certain upgrades stunt or strengthen your progression, which can lead to lopsidedness. At a certain point in the game, around the halfway point, you'll start picking up guns and plenty of ammo. This makes a lot of encounters really easy because you can just click heads and get a similar amount of XP as you would if you just killed an enemy with your hands. So my combat was maxed out by the end of the game, despite the rarity of me actually swinging something exponentially increasing. Because you now have guns, a lot of your enemies have guns too, which means you'll have a huge supply of ammo, which would be your only deterrent from abusing these weapons. I don't think this is a major problem, mind you, but the flip side of this is the grappling hook. This game came out in 2015. Of course it has a grappling hook. And of course, it's amazing. This thing is a game changer. With the press of a button, you can throw out a line and pull yourself in. You can even cancel it mid-pull and immediately throw out another line like an apocalyptic Spider-Man. You can't completely fulfill this fantasy though, because the grappling hook has a limited use before recharging. 4 times with max level, and before that, around 2. In the slums, you can clear the larger gaps between huts, and in Old Town, you can get from the ground to the rooftops in less than a second. Playing around the limited use was a lot of fun, and took extra forethought as you'd have to find routes that don't rely entirely on the grappling hook. It also serves as a great way to catch yourself if you miss a jump. The grappling hook really takes this game from fun to fantastic in the parkour department, but there is a slight problem progression-wise. Using the grappling hook is essentially the game doing the movement for you. There were plenty of times within the slums where you would have to find the way to a rooftop, and this provided experience and a micro-puzzle for the player. The grappling hook skips all of that, including the experience you would get from the movement. On top of that, the experience gained from using the hook is minimal compared to most other moves. So while it is fast and fun, it also stunts your growth in parkour. This is easily remedied by not using it, but I feel that tweaking the experience gained when using it could allow us to not only have a deeper level of fun, but also keep up with our agility experience and eventually reach max level naturally. By the time I was finished with the game and every side quest, I was still short by about a level and a half, and the reason I feel this is an issue is because running around without running out of stamina is where I had the most fun with the movement, and there's a good chance a lot of players didn't get to experience this. Overall though, the fact the grappling hook is in the game, and I can't overstate this, is amazing, and it works like a dream regardless of any experience woes I have, and I only have them because of how rewarding leveling up is. In the early game, leveling up is even more important than in the end game. When you arrive in Harran, you have no skills and experience, so the game throws you a bone in the nighttime as experience is doubled. This gives you an incentive to actually go out at night despite the dangers, which I will admit I abused for the first half of my playthrough. In theory, this can make the nighttime less threatening as you become so used to it, but I can't say I agree because even at max level, I shit myself when a volatile would catch up with me. You may be questioning how I spend so much time at night when it's only 7 minutes every hour, and that's because you can rest at any of the safe houses to advance time. On one hand, this allowed me to experience the night whenever I wanted to, but on the other, it allowed me to experience the night whenever I wanted to. I know that's completely contradictory, but what I mean is that the nighttime means nothing if you can just pick and choose when you want to engage with it. It takes away the suspense and agency of moving in the night if you can just opt out whenever. One of the most memorable missions in the game is your first assignment, which sees you getting distracted, rummaging around for antizin, and being stuck outside at night. This is one of the most memorable parts of the game because you are completely unprepared and thrown to the wolves. I think the game would be more engaging if we couldn't skip the night. Maybe at a certain time safe houses close up for the night, trapping us outside to either do quests or just survive. I feel that this would also give you more agency in the day, as your top priority would be to prepare for the night by looting and crafting. Resources are as hard to come by as it gets. The key to survival is to always be crafting, looting, and dismantling things. No matter where you stand in Dying Light, you'll always be within a few feet of something to be looted. Gauzes, alcohol, batteries, electronics, metal parts, and so on will be used for crafting weapon modifications and blueprints. The only problem with the crafting system is that you'll likely be crafting things like lockpicks in bulk, and not having a bulk crafting option makes crafting things tedious and it just takes too long. There doesn't need to be a loading animation every time you craft something, but perhaps that enters nitpick territory. Of course, among the rubbish you'll find weapons. These range from 2x4s to pipes to katanas, and they all feel good. These weapons scale to your level too, so you'll consistently be swapping out old weapons for new weapons. But that also means you shouldn't save weapons for an emergency, as by the time you need it, it might be ineffective compared to the new loot. Why would you want to save your weapons? Because they can break, and in detailed fashion too. Weapons degrade over time. A blade, for example, will become dull, dented, distorted, and eventually broken. Each weapon can be repaired a varying number of times through the use of metal parts, so scrounging around for those bad boys, especially in the early game, is important for making full use of your different weapons. When a weapon is broken, it's a good idea to toss it at your opponent, which will deal extra damage to them. The durability forced me to become familiar with every class of weapon, and it also punished me for attempting to keep a cheese weapon in my back pocket. This did eventually happen with the introduction of guns, but enough of those game breakers. Let's talk about the melee weapons and their place within blueprints. These blueprints, which are obtained from chests and quests, can be used to give different effects to your weapons, be that poison, shock, bleeding, etc., and it even gives it a damage boost. Creating weapons using these blueprints will consume the base weapon along with a handful of resources, as does creating potions that increase stamina and power, and medkits also require resources. You see where I'm going with this, right? I could sound like a broken record, but I'll try to spare you and just say that everything you want to make or do in the inventory costs some sort of resources, and managing those resources is a tricky but enjoyable challenge. Perhaps you have a really good weapon that's broken, but no metal parts. Now, do you use a different weapon, or dismantle one of your other weapons which will give you metal parts? Decisions like this are commonplace, though I never felt limited by the lack of resources. I was almost always able to afford what I needed, assuming I sacrificed something else, or if I was looting properly. You don't need to clear every single room, but picking up anything in close proximity will be plenty. Many of these chests that you'll be looting are locked, and this forces you to engage with the lockpicking. It's the same as Skyrim, beat for beat, and that's okay. I never found it tedious to create or use lockpicks, but I also didn't have any real fun with it. If you really can have fun doing this over 100 times. It acts as a reasonable barrier and on occasion forces you in a similar situation to the weapons, where you might sacrifice a weapon for parts that can be used to craft lockpicks, which can open chests that may contain a weapon better than the one you dismantled. You'll notice some areas within the game are more saturated than others in terms of loot, and these areas will be ones you revisit often. One, and this one is pretty well known, is the bridge. The collapsed bridge on the edge of the slums will take patience and familiarity with the movement to get across via the wire that acts as a zipline after a lengthy ascent up the 2 towers. Once at this pop-up medical center, you'll have access to police vans that contain high-tier weapons and medic vans that contain medkits, and that's not even mentioning the abundance of medkits, gauzes, and alcohol stored in the tents. This is a spot that I returned to on multiple occasions to stock up on healing supplies, though it was never tedious to me because there was a challenge to getting there. It was less of a pit stop and more of a contained challenge that I would do to guarantee myself some supplies. The same function is served in the quarantine zone, zones as they often provide drops or disaster relief on site packages, which if returned to the quartermaster will yield a considerable amount of XP. Most of you that have reached endgame levels have farmed these a fair bit, as well as the other drops that appear on the map. Of course, grabbing weapons and gear and kitting yourself out is one of the simple joys of Dying Light, but what of its enemies? Well, I'm sorry to say that my thoughts are not as glowing. You have your basic zombies. They take a few hits to go down, perhaps too many, but for now let's move on to the virals. They're zombies that are faster and more aggressive. They do more damage and have the ability to strafe away from your attacks. They come out during the day, but only when loud noises attract them, and they roam freely in the night. Then you have the final evolution, the volatiles, which are the demonic-looking super zombies that only come out from their typically underground hives at night, to feed on clumsy players like you. The volatiles take a major amount of damage and deal it too. Unless you have a boatload of ammo or an army behind you, don't fight these guys. They're your primary source of fear and one of my favorite enemies in the game because while they are challenging and can trip you up, you are given everything you need to at least outrun them. Next up is the goons and demolishers. Both of these larger zombies, if not mutants, play the role of mini-boss and eventually recurring enemy. I have a few issues with them though. Let's tackle the goon first. The goon is a large rebar-wielding foe that can take an absurd amount of damage in the early game and does a decent amount too. He swings his hammer at you, which sends a shockwave to hit you. If you're too close, then they'll give you a little smack with their hand, but the rebar slams are what you need to worry about. This is because the hitboxes are embarrassingly broken. I feel like I'm missing something here, but according to the internet, I'm not the only one who's experienced this. It doesn't matter if you're away from them, these swings will hit you regardless. Every encounter with this enemy was just one of attrition, as I always just burned med kits for unnecessary reasons. You might be saying, just dodge out of the way. And actually, yeah, you're right. That works, like barely half the time. Even if you just run in and immediately strafe backwards, you are still going to be hit. Hell, even when the goon gets his attack interrupted by a piece of geometry like in the shack here, it still hits you. He's not even striking the ground, he's hitting the ceiling, but it doesn't matter. I tried looking up some guides for this stuff, but because it's the internet and the most common answers I found were people saying to use a crossbow, a weapon that you get from a DLC that takes place after and directly spoils the main plot, I didn't find any solid advice. I will admit, once you have the weapons, this guy, much like any other walker, can be skipped, but that doesn't excuse how busted it is here. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you encounter these enemies, it's at a point in the game where you have barely any weapons, and during this stage, it's tolerable. This is because the zombies scale to your story progression and difficulty, and at this point, it doesn't have the shockwave. When you first encounter one, you have limited weapons, so damaging him will be a task. But you could use the propane tanks littered around, which will take him down faster but at the cost of drawing in the virals. This trade-off was great, but the moment he obtains the shockwave, which is shortly after this mission if you're playing on normal, the enemy turns into arguably the biggest pain in the ass, and I actually save ammo for this specific zombie so I could just skip it. That's assuming you even have ranged weaponry, which is the only reliable way to take it down. Overall, this enemy was easily the worst part of this game. Unfortunately, I think that does say a lot about its quality. The other side of this coin is the other extra large enemy, the Demolisher. These more hulking foes have the ability to ram you and throw chunks of debris at you. The chunks of debris have awful hitboxes, likely due to the same shockwave mechanic that the rebar goons have, but the reason it wasn't much of a pain here was because the Demolisher only throws things at you when you're at a distance. If you close the gap, he'll just swing his arms around so it isn't a major problem. It's also worth noting that by the time these enemies become commonplace, you'll have plenty of ranged weaponry to take them down from afar with minimal bullets. When up close, a lot of his attacks can be dodged with proper strafing. This, in my eyes, is a better way of doing a large enemy. The toads around the map are the beer belly bile blasting infected that will serve as a very minor roadblock more than anything else. They go down quickly, but they do a good amount of damage from afar, making them glass cannons that, if possible, should be taken out first, as their chip damage can lead to you losing track of your health and biting the dust. The bombers walk up to you and explode. The damage they do isn't too bad because they have a short wind-up in which they stand still before popping, which gives ample time to reposition, though the real threat with these guys is the loud noises which attract the virals. Bolters are the only non-hostile zombies in the game and will actively avoid you, typically surrounded by volatiles. Tracking down these infected is akin to hunting an animal more than it is a zombie. Nothing in the way of threatening, much like the Screamers. The Screamers are easily the worst enemy in the game for one simple reason: children. These little rascals won't attack you, but instead opt to, like the bombers, make a ton of noise, drawing the more lethal foes to your location. Once these things scream, everyone and everything will be on high alert, including you, but thankfully they're swiftly put to bed through a single press. On the human side of things, there arises thugs and the bandits around Harran. They function similarly to the virals, barring the cannibalistic urge and with the added element of weapons. In the beginning of the game, these guys are just as dangerous as the volatiles, but by the midpoint, if you're focusing on the main quest, you'll be fighting the mercenaries more than the undead. Overall, Overall, the enemies here are perfectly fine. They act as a means to flex your abilities, which works in a zombie context. Much like its contemporaries, the threat in Undying Light comes from sheer numbers, and left little more to be desired outside of some working fucking hitboxes. Sorry, I'll shut up about it now. The progression of both the acquisition of new weapons and the rising strength of your foes felt really good across the game, arguably until the end. I find that throughout an individual playthrough of Dying Light, assuming you're properly engaging with side quests and playing on normal difficulty, you'll go through 3 different stages. The first stage is when you begin the game. You are powerless and the nighttime is a death sentence as you're still developing an arsenal and a proper understanding of the controls. This is where the game is pure survival horror. The second stage is the mid to late portion of the main quest line, about when you reach Old Town and get access to the grappling hook. You now have the skills and inventory to defend yourself and get out of most sticky situations. The game still keeps you on your toes, but the nighttime isn't as threatening. By the time you hit max level and have finished most of the quest lines, you are in the third stage, which is where the game transitions into a power fantasy. You have weapons capable of taking down foes of any size in less than a few hits, and mastery of all your skills. When the sun falls, you are no longer trapped outside with the volatiles and other demons. They're trapped outside with you. Death is an extremely rare occurrence, and the game loses a bit of its horrific luster because nothing is a threat to you anymore. Hell, even the virals and anything outside of a volatile end up feeling like a nuisance more than an enemy. A prerequisite chore that must be dealt with before you can complete your objective. This progression is great because it happens so naturally, and you won't notice how overpowered you are until you are grossly outperforming every entity on the map. The progression actually halts at this point because you have an abundance of healing and crafting items, and mixed in with your weapons that have a higher durability and amount of repairs, you'll end up ignoring both health and weapon maintenance almost entirely. The busted nature of guns and the amount of stockpile ammo you'll have by the endgame will allow you to skip most encounters with a well-placed bullet, and if for some reason you can't, then you fall back on weapons that can decapitate most in one hit. I bring this up because while the progression is solid throughout the game, you'll notice that if I were to show a graph on screen right now, that eventually you experience a heavy spike, and while some might say that it ruins the survival horror aspects of the game, I think this is fine because it is earned. Of course, if by the time you hit this point you feel like you missed the soiled pants that come with the early game, then you can increase the difficulty to Nightmare, which is tough as nails. Perhaps you got bored playing by yourself all the time. No matter how terrifying something is, it's always more bearable with a friend, and Dying Light allows you to play with up to 4 people in co-op. You're incentivized to do this because you get an experience boost, and the game does not scale difficulty to the amount of co-op players, a la Borderlands. Co-op is a major reason as to why this game is so fun and, more importantly, replayable. You might be wondering why I bring this up. Because this game is 7 years old, how many people are really playing it today? Well, quite a few as of recording this, and while these numbers are sure to dwindle, the Dying Light Discord was actually quite helpful. I was struggling with one of the endgame raids, and while I did attempt to find people to help me in the public games, which had varying degrees of failure, there was one fellow in there by the name of Dragon Owl 21 who helped me through it, and with a lot of kindness too. So if you're watching this, thanks for the help, man. Unfortunately, there's a gameplay mechanic that I've neglected to bring up until now because of its rarity and because it plays a large role in co-op. The final encounter with Rise can only be completed in single player. This goes for the final mission in the following too. This final level is excellent gameplay-wise, but the ending fight against Rise is completed through a QuickTime event. I imagine this is the reason you can't do this in co-op, because if the QuickTime event, which is one of the less forgiving I've seen, is done in co-op, there could be desync issues. I can't fathom how intense it would be if a party of 4 kept having to redo the whole sequence because one person couldn't react fast enough. I think given how difficult the jaunt up to Rise is, a similar issue could be had there, so I understand why this final mission had to be completed solo, but I think it doesn't change the fact that it left the ending feeling particularly underwhelming if you were playing with friends leading up to that point. But perhaps teaming up with your friends is a little too wholesome, and maybe you'd like to instead terrify them, which is possible thanks to the Be the Zombie mode. In this mode, go figure, you play as a zombie, a mutated volatile and quite a powerful one too. You have super speed, greater agility, and most useful, tendrils, that work in a similar means to the grappling hook but with unlimited use. This alone makes a zombie fun, but pouncing on your friends is just as good. Assuming a player is not looking directly at you, you can press the pounce button to leap onto them and kill them. This will be interrupted, however, if a player shines their UV light at you. The UV light is the player's only line of defense against pounces, and since it has limited use, knowing when to use it is integral to your survival. This game of cat and mouse when you're a higher level can be a lot of fun, as you have a ton of tools to make things easier for you, such as the ability to spit phlegm on a player that draws in a horde of zombies that, if touching the player, will kill them near instantly. You have a similar phlegm that will disable their UV, making them basically a free kill. This is of course assuming that they don't dodge out of the way, which they can. I think that this game mode is pretty difficult to pick up because while there's a basic tutorial for the zombie, there's nothing in the way of tutorials for players fighting against the zombies. This meant that early invasions are full of trial and error, and if you're unlucky enough to be invaded late into the game, you'll have someone with max stats just wipe the floor with you. Your goal as the player and up to 3 others is to, with a limited amount of lives, destroy 5 nests around the overworld while the single zombie hunts everyone down. Since most invasions take place with 1 or 2 people, it's easy to get into a stalemate. This is especially the case with 1v1s, as I found myself waiting above a pipe that a player was in and nobody made a move. It was hard for me to do something because I had no upgrades, and if I go into the pipe, I'm pelted with the UV light and killed before I could get away. No matter how much I try to coax this person out, they wouldn't budge, leading to a match that took way too long thanks to the lack of a time limit. Fortunately, it led to one of the funnier interactions I had with the game, with a fellow named Lazarus. They said, "This is no fun," to which I shared the sentiment. Eventually, I asked, "Is this your first time?" and they responded with, "Yup," and I responded with same. Well, it's been fun. Now perish. I think this mode has the potential to be a lot of fun, and as far as creativity goes, the idea is there. But I think having such a limited moveset makes the early progression a bit of a barrier to entry. I didn't really want to participate in this mode more, even with more upgrades, but in all honesty, I don't have a good reason for it. I think this is a solid mode that takes a lot of strategy from both parties to play effectively, but it just didn't grab me like it did for others, who are still playing it consistently to this day. I think adding a shorter express game mode would make it more fun, because games can run up half an hour, and a 15-minute mode might mitigate that and make being the zombie more pick up and play friendly. At the beginning of this video, I talked a lot about the world building and how it seemed that each location you visited had a story to tell. Stories you'll miss unless you interact with the people of Harran. Each of these stories is told by someone who has, through a means of coping with the end of the world, crafted their own. One such is the wizard from earlier, who have convinced all of the children of the daycare that he and his wife run that the horrors outside are the product of dark magic. Their view of Harran is from the perspective of a kingdom in ruin, which in words may not be far off, but in reality is understating the current conditions. What does the wizard's wife think about this? Well, let's just say there's a reason you can't enter the basement under any conditions. Even the Demolisher is viewed simply as a troll outside of the castle walls, to which we, the knight, slay. From a design perspective, these stories may not satisfy you any more than the main questline will, but I think many people, including myself, despite going in potentially wanting deep mechanics, will be enamored by the tales each quest weaves. One of the first you get access to is Gazi, who has his own cult following within the community. Gazi lives at home with his mother and is rumored to have antizin for his mother who is infected. When we arrive, Gazi, seeming a few sandwiches short of a picnic, tells us that he's in the middle of movie night with his mother and that he won't let us in unless we grab some supplies for him. This is but a fetch quest, no different than a lot of the others around Harran, but this one is memorable for its reward. Not a weapon, not a blueprint or a medkit, but rather the discovery that Gazi's mother is a makeshift puppet, and their movie is just white noise. Gazi, for an undetermined amount of time, has been living in his own delusion. And what do? We leave. There's no doubt in my mind that by the time we're done in Harran, he'll be dead. Or worse. There are some quests that are just fetching. In fact, a lot of the ones you pick away at through the game will be like that, but I think these are okay because they're balanced out by more nuanced stories, such as a courier that you help. His leg is injured and he needs to deliver medication. If you do it fast enough, he'll reward you with money and some agility points. You complete these challenges for him all over town until eventually you start to question what medication he's giving these people. It must be important because he continues to stress that people need this medication. By the end of this challenge, you find out that he's an extortionist, forcing his customers to give him everything that they have to continue receiving the medication. While some viewed this post-apocalyptic world as a disaster, Victor saw it as an opportunity. There are of course other challenge quests around the map, like one where you race individuals for sport, or shoot a series of exponentially increasing zombies on film for a movie director. These weren't the most interesting, but at least offered a chance to earn experience and were a fun excuse to engage with the mechanics more. Some haven't had their perception of the city changed at all. Tolga and Fatim, thanks to their high intelligence and ego, saw everyone as brainless before the outbreak, so their position as the smartest people in the city hasn't changed. They order Crane around to get different parts for their machines and attempts at escaping the city. As a testament to their mental strength, they are the only people to escape Harran successfully. Unharmed, that is. The high points of their chores is just hearing their dialogue, which reeks of arrogance and a condescending tone. I feel like I've talked about a few side quests here, and yet I also feel as though I've barely scratched the surface. Some see you going from just point A to B, and obviously not all of them will be exceptional. But even the weaker quests see you at least learning something interesting, like one where you venture into a hotel and locate Rise's room, and his gun. The attention to detail here is stellar, even if back-to-back missions can feel repetitive from a design perspective. And this sentiment extends to the main questline, though to a far lesser extent. The locales you visit are where they shine, as while the reason you go into an abandoned school filled with militia and monsters is forgettable, the atmosphere isn't. The same goes for another foray with Jade, in which you move through a repurposed museum, and eventually through a hallucination, which is immediately followed up by a boss fight, which are rare and for good reason. Running through the rain covered in mud leading to the Antetta was not only high stakes for the story, but for the player as well, as by that point, it is the highest structure they've climbed. Considering this quest is quickly followed up by the finale Extraction, and we see why. The final mission is one of my favorites in the game. Harps about the QTE ending still stand, but the build up to that encounter is where the game is arguably at its peak. Leading up to this encounter, you have to fight your way through a few volatiles and demolishers, eventually slipping into the sewers, and if the thing breaking your fall is a pile of rotting bodies isn't what made this threatening, then the screaming child that summons volatiles will. Once you narrowly escape those, you have to scale a building in what might be the tightest platforming thus far. It's a shame because the platforming never reaches this level of precision ever again in the DLCs, and while it's the mission I died the most on, it was the one I had the most fun with. While I don't believe combat reaches the same heights, it does have a few standout moments, one of which is featured in the pit. Stripped of your belongings at the midway point not only proves a great challenge, but also takes you out of your newfound comfort zone. By this point in the game, a majority of your weapons are blueprints and of a high level, but now you are back to the dirt, using wood scraps and bent pipes for self-defense. This makes the eventual boss fight against the Demolisher far more tense, as you won't find much for healing and your damage is minimal. That is, so long as you don't hurl an 80-pound rebar into the mutant's skull. Pushing through the museum was a highlight on the gameplay side, as was the weapon challenges for you to, for a brief moment, forget about rationing bullets. The boss fights were easily the most boring parts of the game in many cases except within the pit, as it just sees you damaging a large enemy with an even larger health bar. Since many of these boss fights incorporate attacks that are tough to dodge, health will be close to zero the whole time, meaning you will, on more than a few occasions, run around until you've healed a bit, turn around towards the enemy, and attack once or twice. Then you'll get hit and repeat until they die. Dying Light does try to do some interesting things with the boss fights, such as throwing in extra enemies, but they serve as a nuisance more than anything, and some of the boss fights in the DLCs are downright horrible. Something that often gets overlooked in reviews is the amount of Easter eggs in a game. Easter eggs don't make a product inherently better than one that doesn't include them, but I think they go a long way for showing players how much fun and passion the developers have when creating something. Some of my favorites include the hidden weapons around the map, like Excalibur, which is stuck in a zombie's body on a lone rock in the ocean, and we have to hold the interact button on the weapon for 3 minutes before it pulls, and the body lights on fire. On a roof in the slums, you can find a blue box that has to be kicked 75 times before it opens, and it gives you a solid weapon. Every 10 kicks, the game will do something to encourage you to stop, and it was pretty humorous, as was the Super Mario Easter egg. If you interact with the chimney in Old Town, you can complete a recreation of 1-1 from Super Mario. If you hit a certain block, then you'll even get an item that lets you float momentarily. While this one was bizarre, it wasn't as strange as when I was completing a quest and decided to activate a power box, causing this to happen. Even smaller things like the knickknacks that pile up in Crane's bedroom as you complete side quests were just nice touches. Dying Light can get pretty grim sometimes, so it makes it even better when there are little bits of fun, even as simple as reminiscing over the memories you made along your journey. Once the game is finished, there are a number of things you can do to keep the gameplay interesting for yourself. The most common is the quarantine zones, not for their gameplay necessarily, but for the large experience that each bears. Most of these zones can be completed time and time again, with some being harder than others. I already mentioned the atmosphere and the stories that these zones tell, but on the gameplay side, their replayability are not on the same level as its atmospheric depth. The first time you run through a hotel and figure out how to get through the different floors, it's a tense and honestly pretty scary trek, but the second time, you know what's around every corner. You're enticed to replay them thanks to the experience they yield, but the real prize is the drops. You can replay these raids and effectively access an unlimited supply of drops, and you don't even have to complete the zone to keep them. This means that you can go into the stuffed turtle, which features 3 out of the 5 drops that can be grabbed within 20 seconds, not bother with the last 2, and just leave. After farming this location for upwards of 30 minutes, I hit the level cap. In a way. Once you reach the max level, you can begin unlocking up to 250 legend levels, which give specific boosts to things like one-handed, two-handed, fists, gun, and any other means of damage. This will be where a majority of your endgame grind is moving towards, and it isn't a very enticing one. I like making my character even more powerful, but you eventually get to a point where you are one-shotting nearly everything, and you keep getting stronger for the sake of getting stronger. By the time you have a 100% damage multiplier, you can one-shot a lot of walkers, so grinding for hours to increase that to 140% 30% doesn't feel like a large change in progression, as enemies still go down in one hit. I think this game could have benefited from having some kind of raid boss or two that you could continually refight for the chances of getting a high tier weapon. Of course, you can replay the quarantine zones and unlock chests within them to get endgame gear, but the problem is that opening these chests become very monotonous and their rewards are typically way below your current gear, or slightly higher. I don't mind grinding for gear in the endgame, but making that grind less about engaging in the game's excellent movement and combat and more about Skyrim lockpicking is just not enough to keep me engaged. There is at least the prospect of leaving your game open to invasions, but I also felt that this mode wore thin quickly on both sides. Fortunately, the DLC do offer a more effective way of maxing out stats and gear, but for now, let's take a step back and look at the level design as a whole. You might have noticed I didn't have much to say about the objectives. This is because the most notable and interesting parts of these missions are the stories they have to tell and how they relate to the greater world of Harran. Seeing how the many prisoners of this hellish landscape have coped with what is the end of the world is interesting. New mechanics aren't introduced, and remixes on the basic goals of eliminating zombies and getting from point A to B quickly are fleeting, but I believe that is okay. I can't fault side missions for being less interesting than the main quests because that's the point, and the main quests really are great. Unfortunately, the plot associated with this main questline isn't. A sentiment many shared upon Dying Light's release is that the story was forgettable. Not bad, in fact most thought it was fine, but it felt as though it didn't do anything new. Dying Light takes great pleasure in indulging in zombie game cliches but making it interesting and fresh with their own twist. In the plot, it seems to recreate those cliches but do very little different, which leads to a plot that feels nothing but predictable and cliche. It doesn't mean there aren't things to appreciate here, like the running narrative of choice and being strong in your convictions, but that there isn't much that's new.
Crane, why do you even give a fuck what happens to these people? You don't belong here. This is just a job for you.
No, not anymore, it's not. I'll be in touch when I've decided what to do next.
The plot begins with Kyle Crane in a GRE helicopter, dropping into the slums of Harran. The GRE explains that a former governor of Harran, Kadir Suleiman, was keeping things under control. After the GRE denied his request to extract both him and his younger brother Hassan, who was confined to a wheelchair, Hassan was eaten by the plague, leading to Suleiman going off of the deep end, turning into a warlord with a new war name, Rise. Rise now has a file with information for a cure, and we need to infiltrate Harran, find Rise, and find the cure. Within seconds of landing, we're attacked by mercenaries and eventually by zombies. We are then saved by a man and woman who we learn to be Jade and her boyfriend Amir, but Amir is killed as Jade and Crane escape. Crane then blacks out and wakes up at the tower. The inhabitants aren't too kind to him because his arrival costs them one of their own, but as Crane helps them, the people are a little more tolerant. As he tries to help people, he comes into contact with Jade's younger brother Rahim, and eventually the leader of the tower, Brecken. Brecken explains that the tower is in need of more runners, people that go out into the field and grab supplies and antizin for the ever-increasing sick. Antizin being a drug capable of halting the transformation process after one is bitten. When Crane barely manages to grab some, he contacts the GRE, and they tell him to destroy the antizin to force the tower to buy it from Rise and allow Crane to confirm Rise's identity. Crane then does a series of tasks for Rise in exchange for 2 crates of antizin, but Rise only gives him 5 vials. Eventually, the GRE stops sending antizin drops to Harran despite Crane's pleas. Crane then promptly cuts them off. Jade and Crane then head to a school which functions as a storage lot for Rise in search of antizin, but they find explosives instead and bring them back to the tower. Rahim then takes them and plans to demolish a building that houses a volatile hive, but this backfires when Crane finds him. We see that he's injured, and he asks Crane to deliver the bomb to the building before it explodes. When we return, Rahim has turned and begins attacking Crane, forcing him to snap his neck.
It's Crane! Oh, Jesus! Rahim, stop! That's a fucking bite wound. You goddamn stupid fucking kid! Oh god.
As this is all happening, Crane is in contact with a scientist named Dr. Zier, who's getting close to finding a cure, but is having trouble sending his research to another scientist named Dr. Camden, located in Old Town. Rise eventually kidnaps Zier and we give chase. We eventually catch up and find Zier on the brink of death, and he tells us that Jade went to Old Town to deliver his research to Camden. Rise then reveals to us that the file he has isn't the blueprints for a cure, but a method for the GRE to weaponize the virus. We then escape from Rise, chopping his hand off in the process, and head to Old Town thanks to the help of a woman named Troy. In Old Town, Crane learns that the Defense Ministry plans to bomb Harran in order to eradicate the virus. It seems the Ministry has told the media that there are no survivors left. Crane, in an effort to stop this, climbs a radio tower and informs the world of survivors still being in Harran. The GRE then contacts Crane again, hoping to avoid public backlash, offering his extraction in exchange for Zier's research. That can't be arranged as Jade, who has the files, has been kidnapped by Rise and taken to the museum. Crane pushes through the fortress and finds that Jade has been bitten, and both himself and Jade are on the edge of turning. Rise then tosses them one vial of antizin, forcing Crane to either use it on himself or Jade. In Crane's decision-making process, Jade is about to turn and makes the choice for him, jabbing him with the antizin. Then, Crane is forced to kill her and escape Rise's museum. Crane then finds out that Rise is going to use Zier's research as leverage for the GRE extracting him. Crane chases him down and kills him, grabbing the file for himself. The game ends with Crane sitting on top of Rise's tower, contemplating what he's going to do with the files. The plot on the whole was paced in a strange way, with a lot of the exposition and setup being front-loaded. I think this world building is needed, but it certainly didn't have to be done in such a boring and frankly drawn-out way. For example, when you first meet Zier, he explains in a pretty long cutscene that he has no way of delivering his research. This could have been delivered in a phone call while Crane was doing another tedious task for Rise, of which there were far too many. I understand that not every quest can be an epic adventure, but going from the intrigue established in the game's opening to running around the map to extort money from the locals, something you already do at a side quest, didn't satisfy me. Fortunately, there are better quests in here, like when you need to infiltrate the school with Jade, but this mission is immediately followed up by a task to grab bolter tissue for Zier. Sure, this serves a purpose for introducing the bolters, but there's a solid chance that outside of the rare times you'll need their tissue for crafting, you won't need to hunt bolters down at all. The plot does pick up by the time Raheem dies, but the story gets really interesting in Old Town, as it feels like things move quickly and there's a solid threat at all times, whether that's the GRE, Rise, or Crane's worsening illness. The seizures that plagued Crane throughout the story were handled well, as they always reminded us of his dire situation, but it wasn't used as a means of making him weak until it was necessary. Crane as a character wasn't a masterclass in writing, but Roger Craig Smith did an exceptional job of giving him a voice, and made some of his lines far more compelling than they should have been. I also found his internal struggle of making a decision for himself interesting. Something Rise points out to Crane throughout their meetings is that he's always doing things for other people.
The imposing of one's will, the creation of one's own rules, that is what makes a man. Do you live by your own rules, Crane? Or are you merely someone else's puppet? I believe I know the answer.
At first, it's the GRE, then it's the tower, eventually, it's even for Rise himself. And Crane never really makes a decision for himself. Now, there are a few problems with this argument. The first is that while Crane is ultimately doing what the tower tells him, it is because he wants to further his own goals of saving as many people as he can. When Crane first wakes up in the tower, Raheem pushes him away, and most people here insult him to his face.
Jesus. No offense, friend, but you're as green as grass. You can't just...
Crane will manage.
Despite this, he still pushes to help these people. Now, you could argue he was only doing that for the sake of the GRE, but eventually when he cuts them off, a decision he makes on his own, by the way, he continues to help them on his own fruition. Even if his reason is as simple as wanting the best for them because he now feels pity for them, that is still a decision he is making. In fact, the only time a decision is made for Crane or Rise's argument is given any validity is when he himself is constructing these scenarios. The first time is when he tells one of his men to release the file Crane needed, to which Crane is upset because he assumes that it has the structure of the Harran virus. When Rise reveals what is actually in the file, he says that following the GRE's orders like a lapdog could have doomed many. But it is not Crane's fault for assuming that the corporation he's working for was going to weaponize the cure. He had no idea what was on the file, and chances are if he did know about what was truly on there, he would have done something about it. This also applies to when Crane destroys the antizin because he is still under the impression that the GRE has a plan that will save everyone. And you could argue that destroying it and forcing interaction with Rise is for the greater good. The second time Crane fails to make a decision is when both him and Jade are infected. When given the choice, Crane decides to give it to Jade, but is then stopped by her, and before he can insist, he has a seizure-induced hallucination. Perhaps you could argue that Jade, even in her nearly zombified state, was capable of injecting Crane with a cure, implying that making this choice was less about intellectual strength and more about physical. But even then, this is a terribly difficult decision to make in the first place. The narrative that Rise continues to spin also doesn't factor in the external factors of why we do things in Undying Light. Let me ask you something. When you do a side quest, do you do it because someone asked you to and you feel some divine obligation to help them, or is it because you get experience, blueprints, and an excuse to test your skills? So this idea that Crane doesn't make a decision for himself doesn't make a lot of sense, unless this is some sort of meta commentary. Perhaps Rise is some sentient being, like a post-apocalyptic Monica, who knows that all of Crane's actions are being determined by an overweight virgin in his mom's basement. At least this does make the ending itself a bit more satisfying. If we believe Rise's claims that Crane never makes a decision for himself, then the ending which sees Crane being given a choice works really well, because he doesn't decide. He takes a third option to wait and mull it over. It's not the decision that matters, but rather the fact that he is prepared to make the decision at all, on his own. If we look at this with the meta lens, as ridiculous as it sounds, then this works too, because this is a decision that Crane makes without any player input. The problem that this runs into is that regardless of whether he makes the decision to give the file to the GRE or to Camden, he's either doing what the citizens of Harran want him to do, or he's doing what the GRE want him to do. The only true decision Crane can make for himself is to destroy the file. So why doesn't he do that? Because that's insane! And yet, that would likely appease Rise because it would send Harran and the GRE into chaos, which Rise also loves. Rise explains that chaos is the one true order of things, and despite that sounding asinine in itself, we can see that Rise himself doesn't even believe in this, as he barters with the GRE for his own safety, which doesn't seem very chaotic. In fact, using the GRE file as leverage puts him in a position of heavy control. If he really liked chaos, why would he bother to try and get out of the city that has fallen into anarchy? It's clear that they aren't trying to bomb it anytime soon because Crane informed the world that there are survivors. I won't indulge in this as much because I really feel like this dialogue is just a collection of sentences that sound intelligent and radical for the sake of it, rather than attempting to actually say anything with substance.
Chaos, Crane. Chaos is the one true order of things. And to pretend otherwise is the sheerest folly.
This is why Rise failed as a villain. He has a deeper layer and perhaps a deeper ideology, but it's obscured, vague, and underdeveloped. Dying Light, as mentioned, likes to build on the cliches of its contemporaries, but when the additives don't work out, the only things that do are the very cliches the game is trying to subvert. Rise screaming Crane's name as he cauterizes his own wound is about as generic as a villain gets. Killing one of his men is meant to show that he's insane and unpredictable, but ironically, because it seems like every villain does this action and a majority of the other things Rise does feels like it came out of the Villains for Dummies handbook. Even as I try to justify and understand where the writers were going with this, I feel like I'm perhaps giving it too much credit. Fortunately, there are other points where the cliches are properly subverted, as shown when Crane kills Tahir. So tell me something. When you see two people fighting to the death and one falls, what are the odds that the victor doesn't kill the loser and instead leaves him to bleed out? You'd probably say a high number. So when Crane decides to give Tahir a speech after piercing a machete in his stomach, I was fully expecting him to say, "I won't kill you, but they will," and point to some monsters like the ending of Uncharted 2. Instead, he delivers this line.
I should just leave you here to suffer. That's what you deserve.
Yes? Then why don't you?
Because you're not the kind of loose end you leave untied.
This was an excellent subversion of my expectations, and Roger Craig Smith delivered this line perfectly. Yes, you could argue this is a little too edgy, but it's the only time the game does something like this, so it feels like a culmination of Crane having pent-up anger from having to kill Jade and basically everything else leading up to this point, and I loved it. Either way, Roger Craig Smith as Crane is a highlight all of the time, and it gets really funny when he yells because you can hear a tiny bit of the blue blur leaking through.
You just doomed thousands of innocent people! That's what you get with your fucking chaos!
Jokes aside, Crane had a compelling story and his motivations made sense. I also appreciated that he felt really down to earth, though I wonder if that was only because his baseline was Rise, who he gets reasonably annoyed with.
Take your vengeance! Will you just shut the fuck up?
I think the GRE was a decent enough threat throughout the game, and I appreciated that the environments changed to a blue tint whenever you spoke with them in the early game. This can be interpreted as Crane reporting to his safety net, his one connection with the outside world. The color blue can represent freedom and honesty, and it's exactly what the GRE means to Crane, but as the game continues and we lose our trust in the GRE, the next time we speak to them, the color doesn't change, symbolizing Crane's lack of trust in them. It doesn't change the fact that the GRE are about as predictable as they come, but again, I'm really trying to throw the game a bone here. Fortunately, I don't have to when it comes to the side characters, as they were pretty well done in most cases. Those like Brecken just sort of disappear after the first half of the game and is replaced by Troy, but I feel that this works considering that there isn't much he can do for you in Old Town when he's in the slums. Raheem was an interesting character from the beginning. From the moment you meet him, you get this feeling that he has accepted the fact that he will likely die in Harran. He often sits on the edge of a high rise, and this could even act as foreshadowing for his eventual death by Crane's hands, opposite to when Crane saved him. The fact that he died doing exactly what Jade warned us not to let him do allowed me to feel pretty guilty for letting him do this to himself, and it's clear that Jade wasn't happy about it either. Jade was another character I enjoyed, though I wish she'd been given more development. Jade, from what we gather, has been a fighter since birth, barely surviving after a premature birth, and in her adult life spending her time in arenas under the moniker of the Scorpion. When she eventually succumbs to her illness, we get a glimpse of the Scorpion in action, and it's truly a badass scene, or at least it would be had it not been for the reason as to why she does it, and if not for what comes after. It's tragic that, even after doing everything she could to keep her brother safe, she loses him, and even worse, dies in the exact same way as him, by the hands of Kyle Crane. Normally I spend more time with plots, but this was honestly one of the more boring and forgettable that I played. What it did right, and what it didn't. There was little that was exceptional or awful, and perhaps that's why it was so forgettable. I can appreciate certain parts of it, and to clarify, it's not like the main questline is bad, because it has some incredible moments and set pieces, but those were often disconnected from the greater narrative. I loved the first time you were thrusted into the nighttime, but if that scene never happened and we just traveled to the safe houses right next to us, it wouldn't have been so good. So overall, while the story is this game's weakest asset, it doesn't drag the game down that much in my opinion, and its world building is still exceptional, and this is why, despite not caring for a lot of the story here, I am still psyched to see where this goes in a sequel. Because while Rise and Crane's story might be over, Harran's isn't.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Undying Light was fortunate enough to receive a multitude of downloadable content following its release, ranging from endgame activities to cosmetics to a full story expansion. It's always nice to see a game like this get support even years after its release and years into the development of the game's sequel, even if two of them received mixed to poor reviews. Thankfully, the full story expansion, The Following, proved itself as enjoyable and filled in a lot of the gaps between this game and Dying Light 2. Before we get to that, we should focus on the DLC taking place within Harran, like the stadium, previously blocked off and now accessible to the player under the Bozak Horde. Before heading to the stadium, we should take a look at what Mr. Bozak has done in Old Town. A mysterious figure by the name of Bozak has set up posters around Old Town with various challenges on them. These challenges were pretty tough and entertaining, but it wasn't anything that I'll remember after finishing this video. A memory I will take to the grave, however, is what happens when you complete all of Bozak's challenges, and he tasks you with meeting him at the highest point in Old Town. Once there, we meet with Bozak, and he explains that he is a lot like us, just a random guy who hunted every kind of infected. He's done everything he could do in Harran, and so he's just been hunting for whoever's going to prove themselves a challenge. I think this is a great idea because at least by the time I got to this quest, I paralleled Bozak. I had defeated every kind of enemy, looted every chest, acquired every upgrade, and the thought of a new challenge was exciting. Too bad Bozak never hunted a double-barrel shotgun because the moment he challenged me to a battle, I shot him and saw his body fly off the tower and into the streets below. This was by far the funniest shit I've ever done in this game, and while I will admit it was underwhelming, comedically, this was everything I wanted. Once that was dealt with, I engaged with the meat of this DLC, which sees Crane being knocked out and waking up in the Harran Stadium. Attached to his leg is a bomb that will detonate if he does not complete every challenge within the time limit, and the mysterious Bozak says that the only way to survive is to finish his challenges. There are 20 trials back-to-back where you have to loot and grab med kits along the way, all of which increasing in difficulty. This DLC is marketed as an endgame co-op challenge, and I want you to keep that in mind because I found that this DLC kicked my ass on solo, and I had to call on someone to carry me through it. The challenges themselves are reasonable, but I found that there were strange spikes in difficulty. For example, perhaps this is because I'm better at the platforming than the combat, but the agility-based challenges were a snooze fest most of the time. Comparatively, the combat challenges were quite tough. One of the early challenges sees you taking down 2 goons, and because of their strange hitboxes and the time limit, I found I just had to stay in close proximity and tank any damage burning through my medkits. I think the real challenge here is at the halfway point, where you're trapped in an elevator and a horde of virals swarm you. I genuinely feel that unless you have a ridiculous amount of legend levels, this is not possible. Even with the good gear you can get from the challenges, you don't do enough damage to the zombies to keep up with just how many are spawning. You also have no room to move here as the elevator shaft is effectively a box. This felt like a strange DPS check, and this is especially the case when we look at the latter half of the challenges, which see you actually in the stadium, and they're brutally easy. Perhaps the last challenge is tough, but given how much room you have to maneuver and the amount of guns they give you, it's not that hard at all. I would actually argue that the only challenge here is the elevator, which makes this a pretty lame gauntlet in my opinion, especially for one designed to be endgame material. Fortunately, I think there's an interesting final challenge if you're playing in co-op, where you have to defeat your fellow players. Overall, I just wasn't a large fan of this DLC. It was short, only clocking in at 30 minutes if you do it on your first try, and I didn't have much motivation to play it again because it is the exact same each time through. One area where I must admit that this add-on excelled is in the loot. After each run of the Bozak Horde, whether you complete it or fail halfway, you're given tokens that can be given to the Quartermaster in exchange for really good loot. The things I picked up from the Horde were almost always better than anything else I had, and I think this is a great way of allowing players to take their already overpowered characters to the next level. Another DLC in the same vein as the Bozak Horde is the Hell Raid DLC. This was originally meant to be Techland's newest IP, but it was instead turned into a DLC for Dying Light, and unfortunately, I'm not looking forward to the full game. Let's start with the positives. Hell Raid has a fresh coat of paint that changes the way almost every asset in the game looks. The medieval aesthetic here is nailed, and seeing zombies being subbed out for ogres and the mercenaries are now skeletons and are destroyed like them too, which was very nice. There are new weapons that fit this aesthetic too, and I can't praise this enough. Techland did not need to go to this length to make something feel new. Gameplay is largely the same, though there is a significant focus on combat with the movement taking a major back seat. I think a lack of parkour in this DLC is fine, but it's a recurring theme. A lot of the DLCs here, even including the new story expansion to a lesser extent, feel as though they focus more on the combat than the movement, which was disappointing to say the least because the movement is arguably the most unique aspect of Dying Light. Something that Hell Raid attempts to do is create a narrative, which is something the Bozak Horde didn't concern itself with. You wake up in a room with no armor or weapons and you have to defeat the forces of an unknown evil to rescue a wizard, who knows how to defeat said evil. You move through different rooms gathering potions, weapons, and it's all very familiar to the seasoned player. Most rooms are unfortunately the same. You walk in, defeat some enemies, pull a lever that unlocks a door, defeat more enemies, activate a tablet that opens the door, defeat more enemies, and then do it all over again. It got really repetitive really fast. By the time you get to the bottom of one of these first raids, you'll fight the Minotaur, which is the same as a Demolisher and wasn't very difficult. Fortunately, there are some newer enemies like the Skeleton Mages that can fire a multitude of elemental attacks at you, and even the rebar enemies from the main game are replaced with larger enemies that just do increased melee damage. They may not be as original, but they are a hell of a lot more fun. The wizard, named Lucius, sends you on a few more raids to grab a scroll, a bow, and a bunch of other things to prepare you for a fight against the evil sorceress Anat. I think there may be a link to Lucius being the devil or something, given his extravagant robes and the name, but I'm not sure about that. Either way, as you progress through the content, you come across a right-hand man of Anat, Lord Asmarod, which is without any debate the worst boss fight in the entire game. Asmarod is a knight of considerable size, with a sword of equal size. His attacks are the usual lunge, swing, overhead swing, and the problem here is that the hitboxes are fucking absurd in a lot of cases, with most of his attacks having a shockwave that, as established with the rebar enemies, is potentially the most infuriating thing I've ever experienced. Asmarod also has the ability to summon ghostly copies of himself that can swarm you, and he can also summon area of effect statuses like slowing. If you don't see the issue here, it's that you don't have time to think, let alone sneak in a hit between his attacks that almost always overlap. If he hits you with the slow status, congratulations, you're dead, because you won't be able to strafe out of the way of his attacks, and if you are already away from him, then his summoners will swarm you, forcing you to deal with them, and by the way, without the slowing, they catch up to you, and when you finish dealing with them, Asmarod will be right back in your face. And that's only on the assumption that you still have health left over, because when you die against this guy, guess what doesn't carry over? His health. It resets to the last quarter of what his health was, but your health and your healing items don't carry over. I feel like I'm the fucking angry video game nerd here yelling at my monitor, what were they thinking? And I almost forgot to mention that even with top gear and damage buffs, I was doing chip damage at best. And I understand that this is likely remedied by having a few friends to help, but these issues I mentioned are on the design front. You can make a boss that is tough and consistently puts pressure on you without making it unfair to the player. If we look at the fight against Grim from Hollow Knight, you'll know that there are few and far between pockets that you can use to get damage in, and healing is almost not possible. This, Asmarod, feels like the culmination of every shitty attack and mechanic from Dying Light rolled into one very large pain in the ass. The only saving grace here truly is the fact that there are checkpoints so you don't have to start the entire boss fight over again. But if it did get worse, it can't as of writing this. This is the last of Hell Raid for now, and I've received a splash screen claiming that there will be more content soon and that in the meantime I can do some raids to receive more gear. You might be asking yourself, why wouldn't he cover the new content? And the answer is because the content that is here was easily the most boring I've played in the entire game. The story was disconnected, and if I'm correct, non-canon to the main story, let alone relevant, and it was boring. I need to stress something here. I can commend and appreciate the new coat of paint here and all the model swaps, but the core gameplay is repetitive as all hell, and it makes the new aesthetic lose its shine really quickly. This DLC does not come with a Platinum Edition of the game, and I highly recommend you just save your money. It isn't worth it. The weapons you get are also not as good as the Bozak Horde, and if you want replayable endgame content, you can just replay the quarantine zones for the best experience gain, and for the best weapons, replay the Bozak Horde. While this is the only endgame based DLC with a story, if you want more of a story, then there's no reason to play this, because it's disconnected to the point of not even feeling like Dying Light. And besides, the following offers a greater bang for your buck while also offering a compelling and complete story. The following is an expansion that takes place around a few months after the events of Dying Light, though it isn't specified. It seems Dr. Camden was not able to find a cure, and with Antizin running low, it is up to Crane to venture into the countryside to find a rumored cure. The dying man who told him of the cure also warned of the horrors that hide in the countryside. We venture in, uncovering the mystery of those who are immune to the virus and put an end to the story of Kyle Crane. The landscape of the countryside is vast, and getting around with just a grappling hook and your legs won't get you from point A to point B in this map that is 2 times the size of the slums and Old Town. To remedy this, Techland implemented what they described as a zombie fantasy, a dune buggy. The dune buggy is an entirely new and fully fleshed out mechanic that is a ton of fun to use, that is, if you can use it. The dune buggy is designed to mesh with the fundamentals of Dying Light, crafting and looting. Your car needs fuel, which can be found at gas stations and in some abandoned cars, and nails to repair parts of your car, be that tires, suspension, engine, etc. Nails along with other parts used in crafting better car parts can be found around the world. Driving the car is exhilarating. Once upgraded, it's fast, handles well, barrels through most zombies, and is a great way to get around the map. The problem I have with the buggy is that the maintenance asks a lot of the player. You'll be consistently driving for a few seconds, hopping out to loot some abandoned cars, and then driving for a few seconds and doing everything over again until eventually you have to get out, repair the broken parts, or craft new ones, or refuel your tank, and I think you see where I'm going here. It felt like I spent more time repairing the car than I did actually driving it. If one part breaks, the whole car feels like it's running on fumes, and its speed is severely handicapped. I understand that there's an element of realism here. If your car has a broken engine, of course it's going to run poorly, but I feel for the sake of gameplay, this should have been altered. You can have a slight speed decrease on each part that gets worse for every added broken part, but that is only if the parts didn't break so often. Every few minutes my parts were breaking, and I had to spend so much nails and time repairing my car that I barely had anything left over to craft a new part, which you can't naturally craft unless you reach a certain level in the new driver skill tree. In there we have boosts, extra durability, and a bunch of other upgrades that boil down to improving the efficiency of the car. How do you level this up? Well, of course by using it, and subsequently by spending what fleeting moments you have on this earth rummaging through cars every other block. Why would I criticize the fact that you have to use the car to level it up when the same applies to combat and agility? Well, for agility it's not like you have to keep repairing your legs after a long fall, shattering them into a million pieces, and for combat it's different because you have access to an entire military's arsenal of weapons at all times, be that pipes, swords, axes, or guns. The other important thing to note is that if for some reason you cannot make ample use of either combat or agility, you can lean on the other. Are your weapons ineffective? Run away. Is your speed handicapped because you're out of stamina? Pull out a machete and hack away whilst you recharge. Is your car not working? Well, better run along the road hoping you find what you need and then head back to your car. I think this problem gets worse when you factor in just how brutally essential the car is to completing any quest in this DLC. Plenty of missions will have you talking to someone, heading across a map to complete a task, and then returning to the starting position. Getting between these objectives takes a few minutes too, and it isn't very engaging because despite the car and the movement in general of Dying Light being based on freedom, using the buggy can be very restrictive. The car struggles on hills, it does not do off-roading very well, and hitting zombies damages the car, as does off-roading, so that should be avoided too. Also consider that the bridge in the center of the map is one you'll be crossing the same way on far too many occasions, and I hope you see where I'm coming from when I say that this map desperately needed a fast travel. I think the main game could have benefited from something as simple as fast traveling between safe houses, but I didn't bother criticizing that in the slums and Old Town, because in both cases getting from one side of the map to the other took consistent thought and input from the player, as to where they were going and how they were going to get there. In the countryside, there are many times where you are funneled and end up just holding W. Needless to say any further, I don't like the car, and I hope it stays exclusive to this expansion. But that doesn't mean there are not things to like about it. I feel like it seems as though I can't stand the car, but that's just because I take issue with the fundamental part of it. It doesn't change that when moving past it, you can have a great time launching off the many conveniently placed ramps in the countryside and barreling through zombies on the street. The car also makes crashing not too punishing, as if you flip your buggy, you can reset it, with you inside it, to the last safe location. I think this is a great alternative to the usual reset of just flipping the vehicle, especially if you drive it into the ocean. While the way you get around the countryside has its quirks, the actual activities are a lot of fun, the most abundant of which is the volatile hives lurking in the underground. While Dying Light never had a large amount of room for stealth, these hives are surprisingly a lot of fun as you have to move between the vision cones of the different demons, though I will admit, a double barrel will still make this a breeze. They offer an abundant amount of experience and some decent loot too. If the volatiles have become too easy for you, then you can take on one of the many freaks of nature. The freaks of nature are an attempt at super bosses. Some have large stature, others large health bars, and all large damage. I think for endgame challenges, these are fine, but I would have liked to have seen more variation with them outside of being larger than average. Don't get me wrong, seeing a demolisher that is the size of a hut in the slums and having a confined David and Goliath battle is great. But when such a colossus goes down in but a few pumps from a shotgun, it loses its epic feel. If using one-handed weapons, then the damage output on our ends is insufficient and leads to incredibly long battles. Even with the guns, the fights can be minutes long and just boil down to burning ammo until a zombie dies. I can appreciate an endgame boss, and especially one with a lot of health, because it can encourage the player to max out their stats or play with a friend. But you can't re-challenge the freaks without completely restarting your campaign. For what they are now, they're okay, nothing I'd recommend going out of your way for, but their inclusion is ultimately appreciated. The side missions here do suffer from the aforementioned habit of forcing you to drive from one end of the map to the other just to accomplish a conversation that could have been had over the radio, just so you can squeeze more car time in, but they're relatively good. One of my favorites for an admittedly disturbing reason was the interaction you have with an injured man, who explains that his child is trapped in the caves below and he doesn't want him to get hurt. As we venture into the cave though, we find exactly what happened to the child. I don't know why, but whenever I play quests like this, I keep thinking that Dying Light won't go as far as to imply the slow and painful death of a child, to then being killed again by our hands. But here we are. The main quests were also fun, and some of them, specifically the ending, felt downright amazing. Something this DLC does is require the completion of side quests to advance the main plot. There are not too many that need to be done, but a problem that occurs is that it feels as though you are consistently prevented from experiencing the story, and I highly recommend that anyone replaying this game just max out their cult status before starting the story. So with such a system, a problem arises. Your playthrough can vary wildly depending on what side quests you decide to engage with. For example, the side quest with Ezgi. Ezgi is the headstrong daughter of the settlement's leader, Jazir, and seemingly the only person to survive last year's The Cranberries concert. Her line of side quests sees her caring for a child whose father has gone missing, and when we find him, he's in a state of shock, begging for Crane to kill him. It's a grim reminder of how close people are to breaking during this apocalypse, and that while it takes one tough person to survive a zombie outbreak, torture can still break someone all the same. When we do return the father to his daughter and we start talking with Ezgi, she continues to show resentment towards the settlers and their reliance on the cults. Eventually, she runs away with her friend and is planning on taking a tunnel to Harran, but it's filled with volatiles. We clear the tunnel and make it safe for her to exit, but then we get a distress signal saying that something has gone wrong. When you get there, you find a lone zombie that must be killed, Ezgi's friend. Still determined to go to Harran, you part ways again and eventually get word from the Harran survivors that Ezgi made it. I like this quest just as much as I did the Tolga and Fatine quests. These two show up after crashing a makeshift plane that was meant to be their escape from Harran. After we help them with a few projects and we get ourselves knocked down a peg or two, we eventually give them supplies for their big secret project. We find out that their secret project is a train car with rockets on the back and fortifications on the front. Their plan is to blast the car with them in it through the quarantine wall, and it actually works, making them the only people to escape the quarantine. One other half-person escapes, but we can get to that later. As for other activities, there are different races around the map for the car and plenty more Easter eggs to find. When combing the map, however, you may find a series of strange, out-of-place items. First is a military keycard that Jazir feels you can make good use of. When you decide to take a dip in the eastern part of the countryside, you may find a strange chest that contains a different kind of blueprint labeled nuclear codes. Then, after fighting one of the freaks of nature, I looted around and found something called the military transport key, which must be related to a similar item that I found on a lone body in the water below the dam. I'm not sure what in the world I'm supposed to use this for, but I enjoyed the mystery nonetheless. But perhaps we should shift our gaze to the real mystery here, the cult and how the hell they're immune to the virus and the zombies entirely. The plot begins with Crane heading to the countryside in search of a cult that is immune to the virus. When we arrive, we are met with a settlement of skeptics that are unsure of our intentions, and with a hefty bandit problem on their hands, it's no mystery why they are so untrusting. Fortunately, we have a friendly face in a merchant named Khan. As we help the group improve ourselves, we're given the privilege to meet with the mother, the leader of the cult. And she speaks to us and we pass out from the immunity-granting gas. Upon waking, one of the high-ranking cult members, otherwise known as the Faceless, informed Crane that the immunity is just the result of an elixir that grants temporary immunity. Crane is then tasked with helping a man named Attila in his research. In our attempts to assist Attila in his undetermined project for the mother, we learn that the mother is actually the wife of a colonel named Jasmine. The colonel seemed to have been the highest-ranking military official within the countryside until his eventual death, and thus had access to everything it had to offer, including weapons, explosives, and potential cures. Unfortunately, it is implied that the Colonel was responsible for the experiments that caused the outbreak, leading to the mother, Jasmine, getting bitten. As we help Attila, we learn of a prophecy that is as follows. When the world is ravaged by a plague, when the darkness devours the earth, when men are beasts to one another, when humanity shall be struck by corruption of both flesh and soul, then shall be revealed one man who, through an act of ultimate sacrifice, shall accept the mercy of the light. And the God of the sun shall be revealed through him, and through him he will speak, and his voice shall be the light and the healing, and he shall pass through the gates of death, so that he may bring new life. Without understanding what the prophecy means, we get at least one clue about what it isn't. When we return to Attila, we see that he has killed himself with a ritualistic mask on, assuming that he was the god of the sun. We then get a call about a kidnapped faceless that seems to be a product of the last of Rise's men looking for the rumored cure. When we track them down and find out that Khan is the leader of both the bandits and Rise's remaining thugs, we then kill him and learn of a plot to attack the dam. And when we arrive, we find that the faceless and the bandits are all dead. And the mother continues to speak to us. She explains that after being bitten, she was given the access to a military cure that was being developed in the dam, and when drinking it, it didn't cure her, but accelerated her turn, and turned her into this. A sentient volatile. She explains that the cure in a liquid form is far more potent and accelerates the process of becoming part of the volatile hive mind, which is why the faceless and Crane, those who have ingested enough of the cure, can hear the mother speak to them. As a sentient volatile, the person has control during the day, and at night, their animalistic, monstrous urges take over. The mother explains that the prophecy tells of a man who will save the world and make the ultimate sacrifice, and then she leads us to a room with a nuclear warhead capable of destroying Harran, and we enter the launch codes, leading to our last sight, the mother offering a reassuring, demonic gaze.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And that's where the following ends. But perhaps you aren't satisfied with that ending. Perhaps you will instead opt to reject the mother's wishes in disbelief, risking your life in a fight against her to escape with the vials, but not before she can force you to drink a vial. The ensuing fight sees you using all of your ammo, weapons, eventually fists, and eventually claws to take her down, walking the line between human and something else. When we do kill the mother, we escape, but still hear her voice inside of us. Confused and barely hanging on, she tells us to just see for ourselves the fruits of our actions. When moving through the sewers back to the tower with the cure, we end up outside of Harran somehow and come across a family at a playground. They seem frightened at us, and when we reach out to them, we see the worst case scenario. Our hands now claws, our skin now rotted scales, and as the screen fades to black, we hear the venomous scream of a now volatile Crane. And that is where the following ends. Okay, but maybe that is too bleak for you, and perhaps you realize that the nuke option wasn't so bad. In that case, we don't need the mother at all. Using the mysterious items from earlier, we can enter a military container and activate a separate warhead. In our last seconds, as the clock ticks down, we look behind us and see the outside world. So bright compared to the dark interior that it's a blinding white, and as the clock strikes 0, that white fills our vision. Okay, now that is actually the final ending. These endings are damn near perfect. It offers a situation where there is not only no winning, but no right decision to make, simply what the player views as a lesser of two evils. If we trust some other, then we're sacrificing the lives of thousands and tossing away the entire purpose of the main campaign. Our goal for a large majority of the campaign was to save the people of Harran, and we even directly stopped the planned bombing of the city to save those within the walls. So why then would we backtrack on our word and our ideals, to then make our journey, Rahim's death, Jade's death, and the death of God knows how many thousands, for nothing? An argument could be made that the nuke wouldn't actually wipe out the virus, because a lot of the volatiles are underground. But let's assume it flattens everything. Then the virus would truly be eliminated. Is that correct? To sacrifice the lives of thousands, to save billions? Is one person truly capable of adequately making such a decision? Are we right to put those people out of their misery? How long before the virus naturally gets to them, and the survivors run out of supplies? Are we truly killing these people, or just accelerating the inevitable? These are valid questions, and unfortunately, I don't think anyone has a solid answer. That's what I like about this choice. There is truly no right answer. I also like that the nuke ending seems to be foreshadowed by the prophecy, with the plague being the zombies, the darkness being the grim state of the world, the mercy of light being the blinding white of the explosion, an ultimate sacrifice, the healing being the eradication of the virus, and the new life being humanity's second chance, and a chance at moving forward. If we choose to reject the mother, then we end up dooming the world, as the infection has now officially escaped Harran. Harran. Our choice was a gamble. If this cure truly is a cure, then the Harran virus is eliminated, and those who were once turned are now back to their normal lives. Rupert, who kept his wife in the basement to rot away for months, can now go back to some semblance of normal with the one he loves, weaving tales to the young of how the night Kyle Crane defeated the evil witch who cursed their kingdom. Whether Crane likes it or not, his conscience has made Harran his responsibility, and if he has any chance of saving them, even if it is a slim one, I can't blame him for wanting to take it. From the moment he enters this slice of hell, Crane's moral compass has been a burden, and if you choose to follow that moral compass to the bitter end, you let that burden be his end, and rip everything away from him and billions of others. The real beauty in this ending is that we ultimately make a choice. Our entire journey in Harran, assuming you believe in Rise's narrative, has been at the bequest of others, and now we are given a literal, physical choice to do what we feel is right. Perhaps destroying yourselves and everyone else, including the virus, is enticing, assuming you're certain of its success. Can you really die with that kind of uncertainty? Some might say it's better to use the cure, and even if the whole world succumbs to the curse, at least you'll die knowing its fate, and knowing you tried. No matter how you slice it, these choices are great, though there is likely a canon ending. Because of Crane's moral compass up to this point of prioritizing the people and their survival above all, I believe he likely rejected the mother, and considering that Dying Light 2 just exists, and from what little I know of that game as it isn't out as of writing this, I don't think Crane was successful. The new zombies that have been teased so far imply an evolutionary jump in Dying Light 2, and perhaps Crane is that jump. The story of the following for this ending alone is far better than the main plot of Dying Light, at least to me. The pacing up to this point is unfortunately determined by what side quests you have chosen, and the introduction and near immediate disappearance of Khan felt even more disconnecting, to where I forgot that he was around when he does show up again. I can appreciate the set piece associated with Khan's return, but it felt hollow, especially when compared to what comes after. The following had an interesting concept and a stellar opening that sparked intrigue and motivation, but unfortunately due to how drawn out this DLC felt at times with its mandatory side quests and the need to force a multiple kilometer long drive between each objective, that intrigue wavered. Fortunately, the ending redeems this DLC, as the last 20 minutes truly make everything leading up to it, good or mediocre, worth it. Some of the side quest weapons also make this worth playing as well, as, let's be real, the 6-shooter is awesome. I do wish that the on-foot movement was more prevalent here, and though it does get some love as you climb different towers and see some fantastic sights, I would have liked to have seen some more dense areas that the car just couldn't access, forcing us to use our agility to escape zombies. With that being said, some of the treks up the mountains were memorable for being lengthy and challenging, assuming you don't abuse a grappling hook like I did. The new enemies here are few and far between, but the lack of a rebar-wielding enemy allowed me to enjoy the encounters here far more. Though the car wasn't my cup of tea, I believe I'm in the minority with that opinion, so your mileage may vary. Overall, I think the DLC for Dying Light was just okay. While the following was fantastic, the Bozak Horde and Hellraid felt extremely limited in both replay value and core gameplay, with specifically Hellraid leaving me feeling as though I'd wasted both my money and time. The downloadable quarantine zones are actually pretty solid for grinding endgame experience, but the Bozak Horde is best for grinding weapons. I hope Dying Light 2 has some greater endgame content like repeatable bosses, and the Freaks of Nature are a good start. I still recommend you buy the complete edition of Dying Light, as the product truly does feel complete with the added content, but Hellraid and some cosmetics are not included in that edition, so I feel that is a great bargain, especially with how often it goes on sale for criminally low prices. While it may seem as though I've scoured every corner of Harran in this monolithic retrospective, I've merely scratched the surface of Dying Light and the many stories and lessons it has to tell. Dying Light did something incredible. It took what was otherwise a horse of a genre beaten to the bone marrow and did something almost entirely new with it, and with an exceptional level of polish and passion. If not by the many Easter eggs and quality of life choices, then by the gameplay that always feels fluid, free, and fun. While Techland's Trailblaze was one worthy of significant praise, not every step was perfectly calculated. The rebar enemies' hitboxes and some of the bosses were downright unfair, and were low points along with the often forgettable characters and plot. But these missteps did not lead to a game that falls flat, but rather one that thrives in its imperfections. These imperfections can be ignored even easier by looking at where Dying Light excelled most, in its world, which had quests and notes to fill a novel's worth of lore and tales. The fact that almost all of this can be experienced with the help of a friend, or 3, is a cherry on top, and a testament to this game's strength is how active the community is even after all of these years. The modding scene offers plenty of ways to tweak the game, and if you're ever stuck, there seems to always be someone willing to step in and help you out just for the fun of it. It's almost ironic how a game about the end of the world can foster such a welcoming and friendly community. This cult following wasn't the only fruits that the success of Dying Light bore, as a sequel was greenlit and by the time this video is out, has been released. I can say with utmost certainty that I'm just as excited as you are to jump back into the world of Dying Light and experience another journey by a developer that is clearly listening to their fans and their critics, with a desire to create something truly great, yet again. Despite its name, Dying Light is a game that shines for its sincerity more than anything else. But if there were one thing that Dying Light taught the player, it was that your actions have consequences. And not everyone can be saved. Every swing of a machete leads to an ineffective weapon. Every minute you spend saving someone from the Horde is another 10 that were taken in the places you couldn't be all at once. Raheem's ultimate demise was his desire to help the tower, and Jay's was to help further a cure, and Crane's was no different, to help others. Whether by a nuclear blast or by an infection that will eventually take us all, Harran is doomed. And the only ones to succeed or reach salvation were those that ignored their moral compasses and stopped trying to save everyone. That doesn't mean people still tried, as they also tried to live their lives as normal, in their own small world, in a fantasy, with their parents. But no matter what they did, they all ended up in the same place. Oblivion. Hello. This video was long, and it was really, really rough to edit. I don't like the long videos. Like, I think I like the idea that I cover a game, like, super in-depth. Like, I feel like even with this game, there was a lot of stuff I didn't talk about, but I feel like there were certain things, like, if I touched on every side quest, then that's kind of excessively long, but I feel like on this one, I really got all of my significant thoughts down on paper, and I'm hoping you guys feel the same way. If you want to support these videos, because they do take a lot of time and a lot of effort on my part, you can do so by joining the Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can get access to behind the scenes content, videos 3 days early or more. You get a special Discord role, you get the chance to message me whenever you want, and you'll also get high-res thumbnails and actual thumbnail sessions where I walk you through how I made the specific thumbnail for a video. Of course, you'll also get your name shouted out in the credits, and speaking of which, here's a shout out to our patrons and our YouTube members. We have Worshipper of the Olympians, Lane, Daniel Latow, Breeze Over, Ben Conway, Bossian, Bryce Stevens, Chiefy, Chris, Gonzo Gonzalez, Jake the Lemur, Mark Short, Pyrite, Ryan Hutcherson, Sean Bailey, The Gamelorian, and Alf Hednar 845719. Your guys' support literally allows me to pursue what I enjoy doing full time, and I appreciate it greatly. The only other things I want to say is follow my Twitter. I'm trying to use my Twitter more, and I think I'm doing a good job. I'm showing like little previews of videos on there and whatnot. And yeah, also shout out to the people who I sent a preview to, who gave me feedback on this video. Like a fellow named Devin, Nam's Compendium, our channel editor, Sean, our lovely friend PlayStation Sean, link in the description to his channel, Blue Boy Finn, Infamous Sir Hellfire, Gaming Wins, and I really hope I didn't miss anybody. And of course the patrons for letting me know about certain things. There was actually an editing mistake in like the first 13 minutes of the video, and I would not have caught it had the patrons not caught it. So yeah, I appreciate it greatly, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't expect like super long ones like this all the time. I think you guys know by now I like to keep things around 30 to 45 minutes, but when I have a lot of things to say, they typically get a little bit bigger. That's all I got. Like the video if you liked it. Share it around if you really liked it, and if you loved it, then I guess subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, join the Patreon if you'd like. We actually have a goal on our Patreon where if we get enough patron members or Patreon members, I'll review the first prototype game. And so I think that's our first goal right now. So if we hit that, then you can expect a video from me on that. I think I've taken enough of your time. I hope you enjoyed this. I put my heart and soul into it. I love you guys, and thank you for everything. Take care. Oh, and stay safe too. Yeah. Okay, now take care. Okay, bye.